Hello and welcome to This is MediaCity. I'm Stephen Chapman and today I am joined by Dr. Richard Jones with one of the longest titles of a guest we've got so far. I may be reading this, so hold on. Director of Broadcast Media, Film, Journalism, Politics and Contemporary History at the University of Salford. Basically the big guy at MediaCity.
Yeah, that's right. I've got a lot of different areas, a lot of strings to my bow these days.
We've got a lot to discuss as well. We'll talk about your brand new role, which you started this year. I also want to talk about journalism as well, because there's so much around the world that's happening. Okay, so before we hit all of the important stuff, we have these yellow cards, which are our icebreaker. Now, bear in mind that This is MediaCity was the brainchild of your graduates from the university. Stand by. This is to delve a bit further into, so we find a bit more about you.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
I think you'll be fine.
Eat out, take away, or cook at home? Actually, it's cook at home, this one. I've done all the cooking at home for quite a long time, partly because when it comes to doing chores at home, I hate most chores, but cooking is one that I could kind of do tolerably well. And I've sort of leaned into doing that over the years. And actually, it sort of started about 16, 17 years ago when my eldest was born, and I spent some time as a full-time stay-at-home parent. I did a bit of journalism on the side still, but I was basically full-time because my wife went back to work, actually working for a media agency in Manchester at the time. And so I really taught myself to cook then. And
What's your go-to?
Well, actually, we're speaking on a Monday, and on Sunday I made a roast chicken. So I do a Sunday roast most Sundays. Also made some flapjacks for the kids' school lunches this week. So,
oh, nice one.
That's right. They're getting some proper home cooked stuff for their school dinners.
Good stuff. I'm going to give you another one as well.
Right, there we go. Pick this one out. What we got here? What is your drink order? Right. Okay. This is an easy one.
We've got a very food and drink orientated. You've got the outfit easier here.
Well, I am a member of Manchester Whisky Club.
Okay.
So, and I've been there more or less since it started about sort of 13, 14 years ago, something like that. So we meet once a month in the pub in town, the Seven Oaks, actually, at the minute. We've gone through different venues over the years. It was the Lasso Gallery, then it was the Castle, Britain's Protection for a long time until they had a bit of a falling out with Heineken, it's fair to say. So we've been in the Seven Oaks for about a year, and we all meet up once a month. One of us, we all chip in 20 quid. One of us buys 6 whiskies, and then we drink them all. And that's really how it goes.
So whiskey's the drink order?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Very specific ones, or?
I really like very peated whiskies from Islay, so some of them, but also I like nice kind of juicy sherried ones as well. So yeah, I am Scottish, so I always feel like a kind of a feeling that I have to really like Scottish whiskey, and that's really kind of why I got into it initially. Just a kind of sense of national pride that I had to kind of embrace the Scottishness of it. So eventually I came to like it.
Excellent. Right, let's move on to the new job, because effectively you are the big boss of all the media stuff that's being taught at MediaCity at Salford University. Is that right?
I guess. I mean, big boss is a better job title than the one you read out at the start.
Maybe that's. I'll have a word with your website.
That's
people.
Right. It's called Big Boss. I guess so. Pretty much. I mean, most of what the university teaches down here at MediaCity, and we've got 4 floors of the building where the same one with ITV in and stuff. So it's a big setup we've got here, and most of those kind of courses and teams are now kind of in my department. Not just that. We've also got film production is partly taught on the Newton Studios up on the main campus, and politics and history is up there as well. But what we do in kind of journalism, summer film, and also across broadcast media is taught here at MediaCity, and most of that is in my department.
And that's a big old department, because Salford University's media, I've been said it's a super directorate, but it's I'm sure you know what that means. But because it's so big, this presumably is one of the biggest ones in the country.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's very rare to have a university department this size, or directorate as we call them at Salford.
Super directorate.
Or super. I like that. Makes me a super director. But I mean, in terms of students, that's about 2,000 students. I've got about 80 permanent academic staff across all the different teams, plus kind of people who come in and do bits of teaching on contracts, as well as all our great technicians, administration, student support. So a lot of people, a lot of names and faces for me to learn and kind of know about. But absolutely, in terms of media specifically, in terms of the number of students we teach in Salford, we're pretty much the biggest now. in the UK. The only one that's maybe slightly bigger is University of the Arts London, but that's kind of scattered in different places. So if we're sort of saying, what is the biggest centre for kind of media industry training in the UK in all its forms? It's right here at MediaCity, and it's with the University of Salford. We're number one.
And that's incredible, really, because obviously, I mean, when I was doing journalism, Salford University wasn't even thought about in that. It was you, Preston, Cardiff, probably London College of Printing, and that was it. Now, University of Salford has just grown massive, partly, I imagine, because of where it is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is a long tradition at Salford of teaching some of these subjects, some of these courses, but especially in film, it's been something that's been created more recently in the last decade. But the association with MediaCity is absolutely central to the success, not just of this department that I've now been put in charge of, but also the university in general. The university as a whole needs to continue to attract new and interesting courses, lots of different students, interesting research and staff to work here. And there's no sort of success for the University of Salford without success down here at MediaCity. It's absolutely central to the city in general, but obviously the university is a kind of key part of the city. And these things have worked together ever since MediaCity started, and it's only got bigger and bigger, to the extent of which that we've got so many students they can't all fit into MediaCity, so we've got these other places elsewhere.
And how is that pipeline working through the course here into jobs in the Northwest?
Oh, I mean, it's incredible, really, and it's one of the big factors that attract students to come to Salford when perhaps, as you say, in the past they might have gone to some other places. Before I came to work here a couple of years ago, I worked at Huddersfield University. I was there a decade. It's a great university, really facilities are really good and everything's great, but it's quite tough in Huddersfield to get students into the kind of the media industries because there's no real tradition of much in the way of the media industry in Huddersfield. I can hear the kind of staff of the Huddersfield Examiner, if they're watching, kind of furious at that. But we didn't even have a commercial local radio station in Huddersfield at that time, let alone BBC local station or anything like that. So there wasn't much in the way of kind of careers for people to have there. They would maybe go and work in different kind of content agencies or PR and things like that if they wanted to stay close to home. Here in Salford, one of the great kind of treats is to walk around not just the plaza, but if you're in the BBC, or if you're in ITV, or if you're in different places in Manchester. Someone like Lad Bible is a great example, on Dale Street, where you walk in and there's a graduate and there's another one and there's an alumni and there's someone else who's been maybe gone a few years and is in a more senior role. So it's becoming a bit of an old school tie network, the University of Salford, and not just here but elsewhere too, but especially around here.
And have you seen that? I mean, you obviously supporting it just there, but that idea that you could be born in Salford, raised in Salford, go to university in Salford and actually still stay here rather than having to go to the southeast to get a good media career.
Yeah, I mean, those days are over. I mean, the days of having to go to London to further your media career, as I did when I was in my younger days, those are gone. You can have the kind of quality of life and the quality of job and career that you might want if you want to be really ambitious, right here in the Northwest. I mean, maybe there's a bigger conversation around the UK, which is that actually Salford and Greater Manchester in general has become almost a sort of a second London, and maybe needs to be diversified to other places a little bit more.
This is your Scottish route talking about Glasgow
that's
again,
right.
isn't it?
Well, actually, I'm from Aberdeen, so funny enough, I'm talking in the sort of a time where if you think about ITV and its kind of regional past, it's really drawing down what it does in Aberdeen, which was the home of Grampian TV, the great kind of franchise there, which put a real Aberdonian accent on the local media when I was growing up, and that's sort of less of a feature there now, which is a real shame. But for those of us here who live and work here in the Northwest, especially in Salford, there can never have been a greater time to be here. And if you are local, and more students each year are staying at home to commute in, there's financial reasons for that. The sort of traditional British experience of moving away to university is a bit less of a feature of life than it once was. Still common, but a bit less than it once was. And so for people from this area, from the Northwest, who want to kind of commute in and be here, they can do so safe in the knowledge that there's a career, there's a future for them without having to leave.
As big boss of a super directorate, which is your new title, you've had to you've already changed a bit over at Salford University. I think you launched a sports journalism course.
Yeah, it did, yeah.
Did Clive Tilsley sign up to that as a lecturer?
He has, yeah. So, I mean, I joined Salford about 2.5 years ago, and initially my department was just journalism, politics and history, which is quite big as it is, but it's got a lot bigger recently. And I wanted to do sports journalism. Salford didn't do it. I knew the idea pretty well back in Huddersfield. They'd had one for about 20 years. It was the longest running course of its kind in the country, and I'd seen how popular it was and how other universities were moving into that. And it seemed very obvious to me that Salford needed to get into sports journalism too. We've got BBC Sport just over there, and as I say, lots of great kind of sports clubs around Greater Manchester. It's really a home of sport. So that was one of the first things I did, and we managed to, it's quite a tortuous process launching these courses. It can take a while. You've got to do it quite a long way in advance so people can apply and all this. So it started though in this September just gone, and actually it's got more than 50 students in the first year, which is great from a standing start. And I've seen the application figures for next year. It's going to be even higher, which is really good. And Clive, he is a consultant to the course. Certainly, he's not doing it for nothing. I'm certainly paying him, but we're certainly getting his experience. And something I really wanted to do was, we have great staff in the university, great people who are former practitioners or people who are current practitioners who come in and work some of the time, who do a lot of the teaching, real technicians with a lot of industry experience. But I was really keen to get like a senior figure from the industry to act as, a bit of a figurehead. And it's quite difficult to do that sometimes in like university structures, because it's like, well, the person's not really like a sort of professor, they're not really this, and these job titles have other meanings, and you don't really want someone like Clive to be bogged down in the administration of having to do an academic job. So I was able to...
His notes would be very neat, though.
Oh, they would be. They'd be excellent. He'd be really detailed minutes on that meeting. But I really wanted to be able to just have him come up a few times a year and do a couple of days at a time and do sorts, use him in lots of different ways with the students. So that's a mixture of supervising kind of news days, kind of industry simulations. Some of it's doing guest lectures and Q&A sessions. And also he's been doing some one-to-ones with the first year students on their commentary. They brought little bits of their commentary in, which,
The reason that was a slight tangent, but there was a reason for it, is that with the way media is changing so much nowadays and everything around it and technology and all the rest of it, how difficult is it for you as a course leader to kind of sit there and go, well, I should be bringing this course or I should be bringing that course, or when everything is changing so much? Are you always going to be behind, or is there an area where you can kind of stay as up to date as you can be?
Well, you're always going to be behind in some ways, in the titles of these courses are sometimes seem a little old-fashioned. Like someone might say to me, why have we still got a course in TV and radio production? Shouldn't it be video and audio production? Something like that, for example.
Yeah.
And that's one of our kind of long-running courses at the university. And yeah, we can look at changing it, but at the same time, there's an element of where you're drawn by what, I suppose, what people will apply for, what people will, what are the terminologies that people kind of understand. So it may well be that, at different times, for example, at a media company like the BBC or ITV might say, we're not going to have a director of television anymore, we're going to have a director of video or something. And yet, if we change the name of that course to just being video production, it might not quite strike the right note for sort of a degree course, So sometimes you are a bit behind in terms of the terminology or the language. I think one of the things you can do, though, is at universities, I think you have much more flexibility than you would do at school or college for academics and industry practitioners who come and teach to set their own curriculum. I mean, yes, there are learning outcomes, there are assessments, but you can change the content, you can change the style, you can refresh these things every year. It takes time and work to do it. And often staff would say they sometimes find it tough to find the time to do it amid all their other duties. But just as if you were running a politics course or a history course, you'd be expected to stay across the latest kind of scholarship, the latest kind of publications, the latest books in that field, and be up to date with that, even if you're looking back at theories or things from the past. The same applies to media. So, our courses in something like sports journalism, or whether that's film production, kit changes, styles of learning changes, styles of output change year to year, even if what's on paper maybe looks the same and the bare bones. It does adapt. So we're always trying to keep up to date, because otherwise, we would be left behind, and that wouldn't be right for us, but it especially wouldn't be right for the students.
Because when I finished my journalism course a few years ago, it was a slightly different world that I was entering into. It was quite a traditional way that a journalist does an interview, for example, or produces the news, whereas now your graduates are facing Gen AI, they're facing mainstream media, in inverted commas, criticism. They've got, it's even interviews now seem to be a different way of people. They stay on their opinion, whatever you throw at them, they will stick to that thing. How difficult is it to prepare an undergraduate to enter into today's world of journalism?
Well, it's really tough, and there's a couple of different ways in which it's difficult. One is that a lot of students study journalism, but they don't necessarily want to be journalists. They just understand that the term journalism, that sounds like a job. Maybe their parents think, oh yeah, that's a trade. That, they're interested in media, or they're interested in writing or something, and they've had an English teacher who said, have you thought about journalism? So, oh yeah, it's quite good. Or maybe they admire certain people they've seen. That we always ask people who their favourite journalist is. Someone like Louis Theroux always gets a big shout, or Stacey Dooley as well. Folks like that, so they sort of like that. Or Amelia de Moldenberg, would be another that people really love. And I suppose what you do on a course like journalism is you say, right, okay, you want to be Amelia de Moldenberg, that's great, but you've got to kind of understand the basics of content production, of ethics and law and all these other things, and writing, in order to kind of set the stage for you to go and do your own thing later. So there's that. You've got to try and not necessarily win people over to the idea of, yes, by the way, you've got to sit in a council meeting for months and years, for hours. Otherwise, you're not a proper journalist. Yeah. But there is a bit of that. You've got to kind of do that, and we do that on the courses. But you can't just be narrowly focusing people on just a job in the local press, because it wouldn't be right to force people down that road at a time when that's an industry that for 20 years has faced its own challenges. So it wouldn't, when I was studying journalism too, that was very much the expectation. You'd go and do local print journalism or local commercial radio probably, and there's not so many jobs in those areas anymore, and they're not as attractive as they once were.
Journalism has changed in how it's viewed by people who are not journalists.
Yes, that's true. It has, yeah. So the sort of question of trust is really important. Trust in lots of institutions has declined, but journalism is one of them. And trust in our kind of institutions of journalism is certainly declined in around about the last 10 years. You can more or less point to the sort of 2016 time, the kind of Brexit time, as a start of, not just because of the Brexit referendum, but social media moving into a different phase. I think it's probably fair to say around then as well. The BBC still remains our most trusted, just ahead of some others. And the local press, as I'm sure local news editors will not be afraid to remind you, is right up there too, in terms of the most trusted. But that kind of idea of moving into these kind of companies is quite difficult, often because as well, students, these media companies, these traditional media companies, are not necessarily part of their media diet as growing up. It's a little bit more of an exception rather than the rule that they would necessarily consume all this stuff. I mean, yeah, they will, especially if they, if you ask a student, do you listen to Radio 1? They'll say, well, no. But you say, but they'll have seen it on YouTube. They've seen sessions on YouTube. And he said, well, they consume that stuff in a slightly different way. But are they sat, listening to Greg James in the morning? Possibly not. More's the pity, because Greg James in some ways is a throwback to the sort of the great days of Radio 1 in the past. He's I believe he's now the highest paid member of staff at the BBC, and it's great as an old radio person that it's a radio person who's the top, and he's a sort of a top broadcaster who sort of stood as a kind of a classic radio show. With lots of new twists on it. But yeah, it's difficult in a way to try and, part of the job of training people to be journalists is trying to get them to understand even what these companies do and what they're for. They don't sort of necessarily have the experience of having a local paper in their house in the morning. They're just not as familiar with that content. So that's another challenge. But, that's part of the challenge. But also it's empowering students to be able to say, okay, well, if I do go into work in a mainstream media company in one of these kind of journalistic roles, am I going to be the one who's going to be bringing the skills to change what they do? Am I going to be the one who's going to go into even a local newsroom and have the ability to establish their podcast or take it on or take on what they're doing on TikTok. And it's not really very good at the minute, so I'm going to develop it and change it. And that's one of the sort of services, I guess, that universities like ours can provide the industry.
So it's effectively, and I think we discussed this on the podcast before, whatever else kind of is happening in the mushroom above, the foundations of what is media production, content production, journalism, they've kind of remained the same at the end of the day.
Well, it's just talking to people mostly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that.
Not libelling them. At the
It's
end
not
of it.
libeling them, yeah. It's talking to people and there's finding out what's going on. That hasn't changed, although the ways of doing it are changing, have changed. And I think even if you look at media as it is today versus media as it was some time ago, those changes may seem subtle day to day or week to week, but you can see that it's really, really different. I'm doing some research at the minute on the changing nature of kind of sports news, especially in the local press, and I can tell you that's changed quite a lot over the years.
Has it? Because it's a book, isn't it? That you've got
Yeah, I'm writing a book at the minute
Yeah.
about sports journalism, so it's going to be called Sports Journalism in the UK. Catchy title. It's coming out later in the year with Routledge. So it's like an academic publication, but I'm doing lots of different chapters on lots of different things to do with sports journalism.
And has it changed?
One area that I've looked at specifically, one of the chapters is about the changing nature of sports newspapers. So really, all the listeners and viewers will remember the old Saturday sports specials. They used to come on like green or pink paper.
Pinks, weren't they?
The pink in Manchester, or growing up in Aberdeen, ours was green. And they would come on a Saturday afternoon with all the latest scores and stuff. And I wanted to look at what was the content of those versus the content of sports news websites today and see how they've changed. So I picked out 1975, 1995, 2025, looked at 4 different days for 4 different newspapers. So actually I picked Aberdeen, but also Hull, Birmingham and Belfast, just to see what the coverage was. And one thing that I found, there's a sort of a view in sort of studying a journalism that actually, although local journalism has struggled financially, one area where it's remained powerful is football coverage, sports coverage in particular. It's leaned into that. But even with that, you find that there's been a huge drop-off in the volume of actual content. So I found like those old sports newspapers on a Saturday, each individual copy of each individual paper would have about 100 stories in it, more or less. Right, little ones up to big, match reports and stuff. A lot of kind of live coverage of what was going on that day. Nowadays, even the busiest kind of sports news local press websites will do maybe 20 or 30 stories, if that, on a Saturday. When it's not the football season, it might be 4 or 5, even 1. I found just publish 1 story, and even then, it's almost always about football, or in the case of Hull Rugby League. Mm-hmm. The rest of the sports landscape has kind of disappeared to a great extent. So it's lower league football, it's kind of grassroots, it's the amateur game, which used to make up a lot of these papers, but also basically just all other sports really. Yeah. All other sports are essentially disappearing from kind of they're not part of the agenda locally so much anymore. I mean, yeah, all that information is out there. Your clubs have their own media channels that they put out. The other kind of headline statistic, I suppose, was in the 70s and the 90s, about 45% of material in the local press sport was football. Now it's much more than 2/3 is football.
Wow. And do you think that's budgets in regional press, mainly? Yeah.
It's a bit of that, and it's a bit of just realising that now we can see how many people click on each story. There are some things that it's a lot of things that's just not worth the effort us even putting it up there. Even if all we're doing is basically copying and pasting something and putting it online, so few people are going to read it. There's no reason for it.
And the power of Google and search engine optimization and everything. I mean, darts. You wouldn't have known much about darts until they turned up, and then suddenly
it's funny that because I looked at these papers from the 70s. Hey, there's a lot of darts in there. Let me tell you, all the local leagues were all being covered. That was before darts was on TV, really. It was first on TV in the mid-70s on Yorkshire Television on the Indoor League. But it wasn't until the late 70s that they did the split screen. That was a BBC innovation.
That's so you can see the board.
Yeah, possibly the greatest innovation in sports television history. So fair play to the BBC.
And I've been at Blackpool watching them call the corner. Yeah, well, that's a skill.
But it shows you that there was an audience for darts, and to be honest, darts, had it not had that split in the 90s, would probably have reached the pinnacle sooner, probably than it has done now. But you can see it's now become, behind football, behind boxing has had a resurgence too. But it's really it's one of our most popular sports now.
we're going to stick with the theme of budgets, I imagine, in a way, and also because of my obsession with all of your publications, court reporting.
Yeah.
You've had a book out for a while on court reporting.
Yeah, that's right.
We've covered this a lot in the media over the fact that local journalism, they can't always afford to cover the courts. We've covered a lot about over the years about should cameras be allowed in courts, and then suddenly over the last couple of months there's been talk about removing juries because there were such a long waiting list of people to go to court. They're saying, well, if we got rid of juries we can run through them quicker. It started me thinking, well, are we now at a stage where if we don't start reporting and we don't start filming, there's a danger that justice might not be done in the way that we're expecting?
Yeah, I mean, so this was a book I had out but just over a year ago, and it was based on my PhD that I did. So it's called Reporting the Courts. You can still be among the first to read it. But it's an academic book, and I've sort of done lots of research into all these different areas of the courts. What I would say is that we're really reliant now on local newspapers. The same local press companies that have struggled financially, have faced hardship in recent times. They're often the only journalists left now in any courtroom.
Because we all see on the television, we see the high profile cases and there's not enough people, there's not enough space for all the people to get in, but 99% of court cases there's hardly anybody in there at all.
That's right. I mean, even in the high profile cases, the big crowds will turn up maybe for the first day, the opening statements, and then the verdict. Yeah. They're not even there sort of day in and day out. But what it means is that if you are working in the local press and you're the court reporter, even in a place like Manchester, I mean, the MEN is, I think, the last paper in the country that has two court reporters, Andrew and Amy, two Crown Courts, and they cover those. So they often will have it, to themselves, really. I mean, yes, there are press agencies, and yes, maybe the national media might turn up once in a while, but it's relatively rare. They can almost have their pick of any story they want, any case they want to go and watch.
Big exclusive, some of them would be.
Well, they've become exclusive because there's no one else there, which is, one reason why the local press companies are still maintaining court reporters, partly because it's sense of public service, is the right thing to do, but also, let's be honest, behind the football that I mentioned and why valuable that content is, these kind of big crime, these big court stories, people do read them. And in fact, in some ways, courts, the coverage of the courts in some ways has greater quality than it once did. There's more space online to run longer pieces, and people really do read them. So at the end of these cases, a journalist like Andrew or Amy from the MEN or whoever, Adam from the Liverpool Echo, they will write these kind of 2,000-3,000 word background stories, and the data from the press companies, people read these right to the end. They absolutely love these kind of true crime stories, and they're in real detail. So actually, for the big, the murder trials and stuff that these folks can cover, it's really there. But the danger is in the places when they're not there, when those individuals aren't there, and that's the case for most cases in the magistrates' court, and that's really where justice is like a conveyor belt, and very few people are there to observe or watch because the public don't attend court, and so if there's no public, no press, who's really keeping an eye on what's going on?
So do you think we're at a time where we should be considering filming proceedings?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit now. The sentencing remarks can be shown. It's just a locked off shot of the judge. Since that's been brought in 3 or 4 years ago, I mean, it has been used in dozens of cases, and it has been interesting in the sense that judges' sentencing remarks are being taken pretty much in full live by BBC and Sky. They'll stay across it live. Often it's 30, 40, 50 minutes, partly confirming that judges do like the sound of their own voice. But also it's a good opportunity for judges to explain their decisions in a way that doesn't go through the traditional filter of the tabloid press. So, for example, you don't get that kind of summary which is like, so-and-so has walked free after this, or so-and-so has had a lenient sentence. It gives them the opportunity to sit and explain it, why they've come to kind of different, why it's different, why it maybe doesn't seem as much. So that's kind of interesting. But I think we could see more of it. I think at the moment there's really kind of, although there's more filming at like the Court of Appeal and stuff, we really only kind of have, they can sort of do one at a time. I think it would be really good if we could have maybe a team of different video reporters doing this almost permanently, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 around the country, and we could have sort of a choice of different proceedings every day. I think the English judiciary, or in England and Wales certainly, which is behind where Scotland is, I think in England and Wales they're very, very squeamish about anything around witness evidence, certainly any kind of reaction shots of the defendant, which, is really the money shot in television terms. I think that O.J. Simpson probably killed that maybe forever. Certainly in the 1990s, we were moving towards something closer to that, and it's not been on the table since. So I think the memory of that has cast a really long shadow, as did the case of Louise Woodward, which people maybe forget, but that she was the first British person to have their murder trial shown on TV in Massachusetts. And again, that was a bit of a circus. So I think that makes anything more than what we have at the moment, sentencing remarks and documentaries. But as you can see from the shows on BBC and occasionally Channel 4, extensive filming has been allowed for documentary purposes in the Scottish courts. Lots of great documentaries have been made. Also for podcasting, we've seen the way that podcast coverage of court cases has changed what we thought was possible. And Caroline Cheetham, who works at the university, one of the many who works in my super mega department, has pioneered the Mail's podcast stuff on different trials, including Lucy Letby. And again, people would have been very squeamish about that kind of on-the-day coverage, not just a little report, but, a bit of discussion, a bit of real depth. And they've proved that it can be done, and it can be done sort of legally and responsibly. So again, I think we can see ways in which court coverage is definitely evolving, and there's more of it, and people want it. So I think it maybe will get more filming as a result of this. I hope so. I think it's all for the good.
Another topic we should really discuss, because it is the 26th of January recording this. It's 4:45. I think that might be important. We never know. Could you imagine the Metro Mayor of a city taking the front pages of every single newspaper prior to Andy Burnham and Greater Manchester?
It's very interesting. I've been looking into Andy Burnham with a colleague, Steve, who runs the politics department here, who is another great colleague. And we've been doing a research project into media coverage of Metro Mayors, and specifically Andy Burnham. And partly that's because the whole point of Metro Mayors, in part, was to raise the profile of local government, was to sort of say, we don't have some kind of dusty old council leader you've never heard of. The mayor isn't some kind of bloke who wanders around in chains. What actually happens in local government? Let's have a figurehead, and let's help public understanding of politics and all this sort of stuff. And so we thought we'd investigate, after sort of 10 years or so, about Andy Burnham. And Steve has done a great analysis of different news coverage, and I've been interviewing lots of journalists about what's going on. And it's interesting that Andy Burnham, the more you speak to people and find out about it, he is a bit of a unique character, even compared to all the other Metro mayors. Maybe one or two exceptions, but really, he is a bit of a unique figure. And partly that's because of the strength of Greater Manchester. That's partly he's got the best gig. He's got the biggest and the best job. It's bigger, but it's also prosperous. But it's also got this kind of legacy that he was able to build on, of kind of the Greater Manchester boroughs working together anyway. The sort of the Richard Leese, Howard Bernstein era has cast its kind of legacy over this too. So when he was able to come in and establish the mayoralty, if you like, as the new mayor, he was building on a kind of a world in which these structures already kind of existed. Steve Rotherham, when he went to Merseyside, had none of that. He went in on the first day, not quite, he went on the first day and there was nothing, but there wasn't really. And other mayors have come along later because, famously in Yorkshire, they couldn't agree and they couldn't agree and they couldn't agree and they couldn't agree, and I still don't know if they've ever really quite agreed how it should be. So someone like Tracy Brabin is years behind in terms of establishing a kind of a sense of what that role is.
She's difficult because West Yorkshire, there's a couple of cities in there as well, isn't there? So it's not like one focus like a Liverpool or a Manchester.
Yes, that's right. But there's lots of interesting things about Andy Burnham. Obviously, he had a kind of a sort of past at Westminster, and although he's often said, he's didn't really like Westminster that much, he has, by all accounts, brought a real Westminster style to his kind of a confidence, not just from him but from his staff in terms of how they relate to the media here, which is very important. They will, if you're like the most humble local journalist here in Greater Manchester, but you want to speak to Andy Burnham about something, like his aides can brief you, but also that you will get him. Like if you want to speak to him about it, in a way that isn't the case if you want to try and get like an MP or even a council leader. Like they're much more risk averse in terms of giving interviews like we're talking just now. They're much more likely to just not want to do it or take some days to sign off on a statement. They lack that kind of the confidence or the experience really to be kind of media performers. And that's the case for all the different council leaders in Greater Manchester, or most of them. And indeed, often now new members of Parliament, we've got so many new MPs, a lot of them really don't have the kind of that expertise either, or that kind of familiarity with the media. And they're happy to post stuff on Facebook and say, here I am at so-and-so. And a journalist say, if you then contact them and say, can we have an interview? They'll be like, oh, I'm too busy. So, well, you weren't busy enough 10 minutes ago when I saw you posting that on Facebook, you know. So Andy Burnham, as a sort of a more experienced politician, and with the benefit of this Greater Manchester kind of structure and his kind of Westminster experience, has been able to turn that into becoming a real kind of a major kind of popular figure in British politics. But also, he does have this kind of somewhat apolitical role as the mayor. You wouldn't necessarily say he was a very Labour mayor, and even when there are other borough leaders who are from other parties, they tend to kind of stick together on kind of Manchester issues. If it's about transport or something, the kind of criticism that you might have expected from the leaders of or other political parties locally isn't there. It is on other issues. If a journalist will say to me, if I want to get a local voice here in Greater Manchester about, I don't know, some national story, and I want the Lib Dem view on it or the Tory view on it, I can go to a local senior councillor or one of those party leaders, and they'll say, of course it's a terrible policy and Keir Starmer's an idiot. But if it's about something to do with, the buses, the Burnham and they're all kind of on the same hymn sheet on that stuff. So he has been able to kind of cultivate this image of being a little bit different to the average politician. I think that probably feeds into his kind of popularity.
Do you think that's helped having almost not colleagues but allies across the north? Because if you look at the metro mayors across the world, they all seem to get on. They all seem to be singing on the same hymn sheet in a way.
Yeah, it does. It probably does. And it probably helps that they look to him as something of a leader. Andy Burnham puts clicks on your story. He puts shares on your social post. But he's done it at the same time as really embraced the media too. He's not someone who is, although he does record his own stuff for social media and stuff, he'll talk to anyone and everyone, even to the extent that weekly phone-in he does on Radio Manchester. Yeah. I mean, other mayors have copied it to some extent, but they'll often only do it once a month. They won't sort of take on all comers in the way that he does. He'll take on any question and bat it back, with the best of them. So that his personal abilities do make him kind of different to the other mayors, and I think that's just something about him, really.
Only because it's in your 3-line title, politics. What do you think's next for the Manchester mayor? Do you think this has got a story that's got a long way further to run, do you think?
Well, I think so. I think in the short term it depends what happens in this by-election. So if Labour lose, which they're probably going to lose now, I think Andy Burnham probably would have won the by-election, probably quite handily, and I think they're probably going to lose quite handily, and they probably won't be that close. Well, it might be close between some of the other politicians.
It's going to be a Reform UK kind of question mark over this whole election, isn't it, or in a way?
Well, it makes it difficult to predict. Reform, Greens, George Galloway, who's had great success in by-elections over the years in Bradford, in Rochdale, in a way that is sort of almost unique in British political history. All these figures makes a heady brew, and the main parties maybe will struggle to break through it. So that's going to be interesting. And then I think in terms of May, when it comes to the broader elections, I think we're going to see a lot of reform gains around England. So here in Salford, we elect in thirds, so we only elect one out of every 3 councillors every time, but Reform may well win most of the seats or most of the wards at that election. They won't take control of the council, but they'll be on the way, and so that starts to kind of make it more real at a grassroots level. People are going to start to see Reform appearing all over the place, and Reform councillors, so that's going to be interesting. Although the headline story of that is probably going to be more Wales and Scotland. Labour's going to lose Wales, Reform applied, may well finish in first place there, but either way it's going to be a very new experience there. In Scotland, Labour's going to be nowhere, and it's going to be the SNP again, having looked as if they were on the canvas a year or two ago. The SNP are going to be in for another 5 years. Who knows, maybe even with a majority, which is very difficult in that system, but they could even just about squeak it, and that's going to open the whole independence referendum question again. All of this is bad for Labour, bad for the government. Now, it's not unusual for governments to do badly 2 or 3 years into any sort of period in office, but this would be exceptionally bad. And so I can see that Andy Burnham is the prince over the water, but there'll be plenty of others in that cabinet who think that they ought to be the next Prime Minister too. So I think it would be tricky for Keir Starmer to survive very long if things go as badly as that. He's been able to use, and his allies in the Labour Party have been able to use kind of the procedures of the Labour Party to sort of hold back the tide on Andy Burnham at the moment, and they do have that power, which is they do have control over the party in that sense, but that may start to weaken if there are real ballots in real elections, and that's having real consequences in these serious elections. That is one thing that can really change that.
God, it's an exciting time to learn to be a journalist at the moment, isn't it? Final question before we let you go, because I know you've got things to do. Where next for your department? So obviously you're new in position, but where next for it?
Well, what I really want to do is there's sort of two ambitions I suppose I have with it. One is that I want us to try and keep all our subject areas going more or less as they are now. I want to kind of keep everything running nicely. And the reason I say that is the UK higher education sector's faced a lot of trouble recently, a lot of cuts. In Huddersfield, I knew all about it. We had to, it was tough to attract students in the same way as we used to. We had a voluntary redundancy scheme. It was really brutal, and I had to cut a lot of modules and stuff at that time. It was really tough. And lots of universities have faced that, and most of them have in recent times. Salford hasn't, so I want to try and keep it that way. So we continue to attract students to all these areas, and that feeds through to everything else we want to do, because we can't do any of the stuff we want to do, all the teaching, all the research, all the knowledge exchange, all the interesting projects. Can't do any of that without students, because that's really what pays all of our bills. So I want to try and keep us going. But at the same time, now we're the biggest. If we're the biggest for media, that's great for us. But I don't want to be kind of like, oh, well, we're the best. Well, that's it. I think it's our responsibility to do more than that, because it's our responsibility to try and help industry, help other universities too. I want others around the country to kind of look to us as a leader, and they admire what we teach. They admire the way we go about our business. They look at us as being innovative. Maybe copy some of our methods. I want other kind of universities, colleges, schools even to kind of look at what we do and sort of say, yeah, okay, they're at the top of the tree at the minute. They're the number one. So let's see what they're doing across all of our subject areas. But the second thing is, I think it's our responsibility too to kind of help industry. Lots of problems in the media industries too. We talk about higher education, but media industries have a lot of different challenges and problems too. And I think it's our responsibility to not just help that by kind of training graduates who will go into the workforce and help solve some of those problems, although that is important. And there's lots of problems like, changing technologies, or whether it's questions of, ethics and diversity within the media industries, or working practices and freelancing and precarity. All these things have become huge issues in the media, different media industries. So yeah, we can send graduates out who will help address those in their work. But also I want our research. It's probably fair to say that although we've got a good record of kind of research in media and film in Salford University as a whole is not the most researchy university in the UK. Always had a really strong industry focus, which we're not going to change, but it's important to do as much research as we can and try and disseminate that as much as we can. So that means, shouting a bit about what we have found out, whether that's about how sports content has changed in newspapers or whatever, maybe even more serious stuff than that, and trying to share that out there, not just through kind of academic papers and stuff, which obviously we've got to do, but through conferences and meetings and all sorts of things. So I want us to kind of be able to help solve some of those industry problems, through what we do as well.
Wow, lots to do. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us on This Is Media City. This Is Media City is a 39 Pictures production in partnership with the University of Salford and on behalf of MediaCity. All the team behind the camera here are graduates and undergraduates of your university.
That's right.
So please remember to like, subscribe, comment and share, and we shall see you next week. The production team are Meg Bond, Tegan Easton and James Young.